Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate the support on all the recent content. The NBA season is in full swing, and we will continue to break down games, news, and rumors. Before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so the NBA season keeps on going. And we're gonna initially kind of start by just kind of discussing just some of these teams that are still kind of playing really good basketball as the season has kicked off through the first 10 or so games of the season, right? Cleveland, as we've already talked about before, still undefeated as of this recording, right? They're 11-0, right? They had a come from behind win against the Brooklyn Nets. And this team has been ridiculous on both ends of the floor. Obviously, you have the backcourt playing the way they've been playing, combined with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, and then you have Dean Wade on the wing, right, when he's available. Starting instead of Max Strus because he's been hurt. You got guys off the bench like Isaac Okoro and Sam Merrill. And we've talked about this Cleveland team before where I think both of us, at least regular season wise, were pretty high on this team because we expected a jump from Evan Mobley. We expected just more consistent play from all their guys, right? Like Darius Garland wasn't as good last year because of the jaw, but now he's playing much better. Everybody's just playing better. You got Kenny Atkinson doing a really good job of figuring out all the lineups and pushing the right buttons and schemes. So I guess kind of the big question now is, are we more bought into Cleveland now possibly as like a legitimate Eastern Conference contender? Or is it more so nothing's really changed? Still a really good regular season team, but what do you think?
That's a pretty good question because
Mhm.
I I've really been impressed with a lot of their play, and like you talked
Right.
about the guys having bounce back seasons. Like I think, as great as Evan Mobley has been in taking a slight jump in terms of his efficiency and what he looks like on the offensive end, I think Darius Garland has really, really bounced back. And I think that's the huge key is like you have a facilitator and a scorer to put alongside a scorer, which is pretty cool. Defensively, I think they might potentially struggle, but in the playoffs. But I think, Donovan Mitchell has been holding his own. I think Darius Garland hasn't looked too, piss poor on defense. Jared Allen and Evan Mobley have been locking stuff down. And, if we kind of look at who they played, I think, a handful of good teams and a handful of bad teams. I kind of want to see a
Right.
little bit more. And I know that's crazy considering they are 11-0. But I do want to see them play, Boston. That's one of the teams that I kind of have circled on the calendar. That's
Mhm.
I think um 2 weeks from now or something like that. But I do want to see them face some real contenders because I think we saw them play New York and they won, which I think they're a contender. Obviously, that's my pick. Golden State, they kind of blew them out, and I think I've been thoroughly impressed with what I've seen. I'm not ready to say that they're like the favorites to come out of the East. I know the record does speak for itself, but regular season, I think they've proven that they're probably the best team in the East right now.
And I think that's a good point where I think, like you said, you do factor in that they have played a number of, they've played some good teams and some bad teams, but they haven't played a lot of the best teams just yet. They did beat the Knicks, and they did beat Golden State.
Yes.
But like you said, we need to see, and they did beat Milwaukee twice, although one of those I think Giannis didn't play, but still they beat one of them with Giannis,
Yep.
right? But yeah, you would like to see a little bit more against some of the other teams, like a healthy Philly. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the and like you said, Boston as well. But I do at the very least buy that it does seem like that they're better for sure. It's just the question is how much better is that better? Like, is it better enough to get out of the East? Is
Mm-hmm.
it better enough to get to the conference finals? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think it also, kind of helps them out that a couple of the teams that we expected to be in the mix have been really bad, right? Like, say for Philadelphia, to be fair, they've been banged up, right? So it's not quite the same as say the other team, Milwaukee, where they've just been bad. I mean, Middleton's been out, but Giannis and Lillard, by and large, have been playing. So that's something that's helped Cleveland out big time. So I would like to continue to see more, but like you said, I think so far what we've seen from them is impressive. And if you have Garland with the huge bounce back year, and he's not just kind of like just a mediocre guy in the starting five, like you said, with the slight uptick from Mobley, then like you said, that's going to go a long way. Because then hopefully it's not like what we saw in the postseason last year, right? Where by the end it was basically just Donovan Mitchell going 1-on-5, right? And some of
Sure.
that was also injury. He went out too eventually, anyways. But just in general, that's what you would like to see. Where if you can have these other guys have big nights, and if the bench can kind of figure itself out in the postseason too, right? Then you do have something there. And again, getting off to this great of a start is really helpful, anyways, for their playoff prospects. Because again, you don't have to climb back from a huge hole, like say some of the teams towards the bottom of the East, right? So that's something that you do have to factor in. So we'll just have to kind of continue to go and see what it looks like from here.
Yeah, they're another thing that's kind of surprised me about them has been their depth at times. I think, the rotations that they've kind of been able to figure out and finesse have been awesome. And I think you do have to kind of credit Kenny Atkinson for being able to find, the personnel on the team when I didn't think they had, the personnel to
Yeah.
really go on runs like this, which is awesome because I think that's something that they did struggle with. I do hope and pray that they do remain healthy as well because I think they could have been better last year if we kind of
Mhm.
saw them, fully healthy the majority of the year.
Yeah. So far, uh, per 100 possessions, first in points per game, first in 3-point percentage, right? I believe they are a little bit lower on the boards. They're 25th in rebounding, right? Which, is interesting. But regardless, you kind of look at some of the mix of the numbers that they have here. And, again, there's some things to like because, again, you can balance out the two bigs with extra 3-point shooting. And everybody's been shooting the ball pretty well. Even Mobley has shot the ball well from three so
Mhm.
far. So there's a lot to like, I think, overall from this team so far. It's just like you said, to be fair, it would be good to continue to see more. And I don't necessarily feel like that's too much of a, that's being too biased or too much of an ask. It's
Yeah.
just, again, we know realistically what we had seen the ceiling for before from Cleveland. But if you can get this the entire season, maybe we'll see if they do anything at the deadline. Who knows, right? Then you could have a team that could make a run, especially, again, given some of the other teams that so far have gone off to pretty slow starts.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Um, then you kind of go around. There were, a couple of games today that did happen, right? You had the Celtics and the Bucks play against each other, and the Bucks were beating the Celtics pretty handedly in the first half, and then the Celtics, like they've been able to do for most of the season, have kind of been able to turn it on when they need to, and then they're able to kind of close it out in the end, right? Boston, is 9-2, which is still pretty good, right? Second in the Eastern Conference. And then Milwaukee now has fallen to 2-8. And, these two teams are supposed to be in similar tiers, but so far we've seen them be in very different trajectories, right? And for Boston, I think Milwaukee's schedule has been more difficult than Boston's, but at the same time, Milwaukee has been a little bit healthier, right? Because, like, say for the Celtics, like Porzingis hasn't played at all. Jaylen Brown missed a few games, right? So what's going on with these two teams? Because it feels like these two teams are starting to kind of move away from each other in different directions, right? With the Celtics continuing to ascend and still be one of the best teams in the league, and Milwaukee starting to kind of fade potentially.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about these two teams, I think we should start with Milwaukee because of I think their situation is much more dire.
Mm,
And if you look at this game, I think it kind of goes back to what we've been saying for the past, week or two, where it's really the Giannis and Dame show, and nobody else is really contributing on either end of the floor, and that's the thing that's really rough. I don't think they're going to be able to close games. That's going to be the thing that really comes back to bite them. Offensively and defensively. They're not going to be able to get any stops in that regard as well. But even offensively, like in this game, another point that we brought up the last time we talked about the Bucks was, Giannis and Dame are good, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Like they're not kind of walking on clouds at this point. There's still some inconsistencies at times, and in this game, you have those times when Dame is kind of off, and I think that kind of speaks to not necessarily who he is as a player, but more so his age. And that was kind of another thing that we had talked about in the offseason breakdown, where the core of these guys are getting older. It's not like they're getting younger. And Dame and Giannis are included. So I hope that Giannis doesn't miss any significant time because that would mean their season is pretty much done in my opinion, because what can you do from there? But, he had 43 points in a loss, of 43 and 13 rebounds in a loss. And then, you look at Dame, who's supposed to be the co-star that brings the offensive firepower, 14 points, 4 for 15, 1 for 8 from 3. So that's kind of, what I'm talking about. And then you got, better production from the bench, I will say, but at the same time, not nearly enough to make up for some other stuff. It's considering, who was in the starting lineup as well, like Andre Jackson Jr. didn't really contribute much on either end of the floor. And that's the thing, like, who can you really turn to, outside of these guys? Brooke Lopez aging like milk, Taurean Prince, and then Darvin Ham and and Doc Rivers. That recipe has not really been cooking too well, I don't think.
Yeah, and Andre Jackson Jr. has been inserted into the starting five instead of Trent because Trent's just been bad.
Yep.
And then with Andre Jackson Jr., you're getting an injection of more athleticism and more defense, but it still just hasn't really helped. So, I mean, Shams, he was on Sports Center the other day and he kind of was putting out what he had heard, in terms of what the Bucks are looking for, but it wasn't really anything that you wouldn't expect, right? Like you basically said, they've been contacting everybody and they're looking for, defensive minded guard, defensive minded wings. It's just, again, the problem is right now, nobody really, typically trades with teams at this point in the season. So, if you're Milwaukee, you kind of have to hang on. And clearly Giannis is getting frustrated and, the rumors are getting a little bit louder now, right? Where you're constantly hearing, stuff like Milwaukee right now isn't interested in trading Giannis, which makes sense, right? It's more so, according to Mark Stein, from the perspective of he would have to request the trade, right? It's not necessarily like they're just going to trade him just because, which is what should happen anyways, right? But do you think that there's a possibility if the Bucks continue to struggle that we'll be headed there this season, or is it more so just everybody's just going to have to kind of just hope and pray that some deal comes in and then we'll see where it goes from there? Because, I mean, right now we don't really know.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of the most intriguing situations. I think it's a little premature to say, that Giannis is going to be gone or something like that. But I think that I wouldn't be surprised if it does happen because I think there's multiple half the league, more than half the league would welcome Giannis with open arms. But I think there's multiple legit suitors that could give up, a decent haul for a guy of that talent level. But that's the thing. Would Milwaukee kind of just let that happen? And I understand you never want to hold a player of that caliber hostage, but I think you kind of have to let him go at that point if it continues to be like this, because in my opinion, when healthy, if Giannis and Dame are on the same team, there's no excuse to be 2-8. And granted, the reasoning is the personnel around them. I will continue to say that it's not those two specifically. They're not the primary reason, probably not even like the third or fourth reason that this has happened. I think it's the guys around them and the coaching, to be honest. But yeah, I think it I'm gonna say it probably doesn't, but it won't surprise me if by the deadline we see Giannis on a different contender.
Right. Because I think the first question would be, what teams are going to be able to put together a package? What
Mm-hmm.
package is Milwaukee going to like? And we're not necessarily there yet. So for
Mm-hmm.
now, it will probably be they will probably continue to try to call teams and see if anything's available. But as of right now, teams don't usually do much. So they're going to have to probably hold on. I mean, the good news is for them is a good chunk of the East doesn't have a great record anyways. So it's not like how it would typically be if you started a season 2-8, right? Because you go all the way to the 3 seed, Indiana Pacers, right? They're 500, right? They just got to win over the Knicks. So, you're not too far off if you can somehow manage to go on a win streak. And, their schedule coming up isn't too crazy. So, right. So there is some room to make up some ground because they play teams like Toronto, Detroit, Charlotte, Chicago. So, I mean, and Washington, I think, is in there as well. So there's a lot of teams where they should be able to win those games. That's where it would be a concern, right? So if we're basically a couple weeks from now and they're still like, pretty below 500, that's where it would be a major problem because most of the teams that they're playing coming up are pretty easy wins. Well, I mean, not that there's easy wins in the NBA, but they're against lesser competition. So that's when it's panic time. So if we're 2 weeks in and they're still with a similar winning percentage, yeah, then it's time to start really getting worried.
Yeah, I mean, like I think there's still time for them to catch up, in
Yeah.
theory, and I think that they're going to catch up, but I don't think that it's the kind of catch up, you know. I think they already being 2-8. I think that kind of digs yourself a hole where you're kind of throwing
Right.
the championship out the window already. If they started 8-2, okay, we can have the conversation of yeah, the team looks like they could go all the way again, but 2-8 does not scream championship. I don't care who's on the team. Like if you're 2-8, you're probably not winning the chip. So horrible start for them, and I think that's probably going to be them falling short of their goal. But I think they will catch up and probably be like a top 6 seed. Like I think that's
Yeah.
kind of a lock. But championship, no shot.
Right, yeah. And I think that's kind of where you tend to kind of look is just in general, it's very difficult to start a season that bad and be able to, like you said, win the title. We've seen teams have horrible starts and get back on track, and make the playoffs and maybe make a run, but not normally win the title because, like you said, usually starting off that badly, that means your starting point probably wasn't good enough anyways. And, again, good news for them is a lot of the other teams in the East are not in that much different of a position.
Hmm.
So, that's good for them. But the teams that they're trying to catch up to, like Boston, they're way ahead. So, I mean, their record is basically almost inverted. So, that's something that they're going to have to kind of fix. Because at least with Philly, you can say, well, their big three hasn't played a single game together, right? Like Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, they've only, I don't even think they've played a preseason game together. So, because their guys have been out, you already know that there's room for improvement there. But for Milwaukee, the room for improvement, I guess Middleton, but like you said, Lillard and Giannis have played enough games where you shouldn't have that poor of a record.
Yeah. And like I do kind of want to switch gears to Boston because they do have a player in a similar caliber, as Giannis, where you look at their numbers, very strikingly similar, but very different results and very different teams. Um, so kind of like what have your thoughts been on Boston? Because I think they haven't looked as dominant as last year, I will say, and granted, no Porzingis right now.
Yeah.
But and they have been having some health issues with Jaylen Brown. He's missed a little bit of time here and there, but I think Tatum has kind of been the big story
Yeah.
for this team as a whole, kind of making a case for MVP very early in the season. So what have your thoughts been on Boston and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's the thing is that for them, since they've already won the title, right? I think you kind of already see in the defense season, like a lot of these games where they are 9-2, but in some of these games, like they're down to some of these teams. Like they had to win against the Brooklyn Nets in overtime, or say the Detroit Pistons. I think they were up and built up a big lead. Then the Pistons came back and almost took the game from them. But for the Celtics, I think the approach for them pretty much is just be healthy by the time the playoffs come in because they don't have as much to prove as some of these other teams. Like
Yeah.
obviously, I'm sure we already know that, Tatum and Brown, I'm sure the Olympic stuff probably is motivating them heavily this season. In terms of the way that the Celtics are playing, it's not that different. Like there are some bench guys that are playing pretty well, like Peyton Pritchard's been having a really good season. So I'm still pretty pleased with what I've seen from Boston so far. Like you said, it hasn't been quite as dominant as it was last year, but I didn't necessarily expect it to, just from the
Yeah.
perspective of I already knew you weren't starting the season with Porzingis. Plus, just in general, for them, I just envision them like they're going to try to win as many games as they can, but they don't have to necessarily push the way that some of these other teams will have to because they already know that they're good and they've already proven a lot. So there's no real pressure for them at this point. Whereas a lot of these other teams, there's an immense amount of pressure, right? There's
Yeah.
an immense amount of pressure for the Bucks, even though to be fair, Giannis has already won a title, right? But there's still a lot of pressure with that duo, regardless, because so far it's the amount of wins they've had has been a little bit underwhelming. And then obviously for a team like the Knicks, right, there's a decent amount of pressure, right? Because everybody talked about the moves that they made, and so far they've been, kind of mixed at different points, right? Obviously, so but a lot of this can change. So I think for the Celtics, I've seen most of what I wanted to see so far, but I think with Tatum, him playing so far at a really high level. Like, I know he didn't shoot amazing in this game, but he was the primary catalyst for them coming back and winning the game. And he's
Yeah.
been their best player so far this season, right? Like, he's been, like you said, basically MVP caliber. And,
Hmm.
funny enough, like I said, he was my MVP pick last season, and he could get it this season. Since the Celtics are still going to win a lot of games, I still feel like it'll probably be someone else, just because I think the stats are still really good, but there are other guys who I just think their final counting stats will probably look better, and their win totals may not be that different. But either way, if you're if you pick the Celtics, right, this is what you want to see from Tatum so far, where he's looking like, he still continues to look like he's improved each year, and him continuing to improve only helps the Celtics.
Yeah, they've looked great. And like me saying that they haven't looked as dominant as last year wasn't a slight at all. It doesn't make me say, or it's not me saying that they're that I'm lower on them at all. Like I still think they're an amazing team and very very good. It's just that's what happens when Porzingis isn't on the floor.
Yeah. Then you look over West, you have a couple of teams that kind of started off a little slow, but have started to kind of figure some things out and get back into the thick of things. So, the Denver Nuggets, right? They initially started off not very good. And since then they've won 4 in a row. They're currently, in a dogfight against the Dallas Mavericks right now. So we'll see, what that ends up looking like. But, so far, despite Aaron Gordon being out, right? Jamal Murray obviously had missed a couple of games with a concussion, but since then the Nuggets have looked pretty good. Their offense so far has been, a lot better than it was earlier in the season, which is nice. You're getting decent performances out of some guys. Like Christian Brown has been fantastic, honestly, so far in the starting five this season. So no real complaints um for him, which is what you want to see, right? Because obviously they chose to let go of KCP in favor of him, right? And he's kind of lived up to his billing. Even some of these other guys like Peyton Watson now has been put into the starting five because Aaron Gordon's been hurt. He's been playing pretty well, which is what you want to see because we talked about this is, a moment for him, right? To be able to kind of get all these minutes, you know, for no reason other than the fact that they don't have anyone else to put out there. And then even some of their other guys, like a Strother's been a little bit better, as of late, right? So and then Michael Porter Jr. has also been playing pretty well recently. So you're just getting overall good performances from a lot of different players. And that's definitely helped because some of these guys were kind of underwhelming to start the season. And, now they've started to pick things up. Jokic is still kind of has to put up these ridiculous numbers. But either way, you're liking what you're seeing so far from the Nuggets, compared to earlier in the season. So now it seems like they've righted the ship.
Yeah, I mean they had a quick turnaround, and granted it wasn't like we were 20, 30 games into the season. So I think a lot of
Hmm.
people did kind of expect that. I think the main question for this team isn't necessarily the regular season. I think we all know where
Right.
they're probably going to finish. In a range in a ballpark area and stuff like that. But I think the question is, can they get back to the NBA Finals? That's kind of what everyone wants to know because they have Jokic, who's arguably the best player in the league. But I don't know if that's going to be possible because I'm going to be 100% real and transparent. I've kind of lost faith in Jamal Murray. I know, he's kind of been up and down this season, but to me, he doesn't look as explosive as the title year. He doesn't look, he can't really create as much space as I kind of thought that he would, and it all really went back to the Olympics. He kind of looked there, and it's kind of carried over. And even like having a concussion, I feel like that's an injury that is probably going to affect a basketball player a little bit differently than, say a different sport. And I think it might be hard for him to kind of regain his balance, touch, all that stuff. But, we'll kind of see as the season goes on. But I think he's been very disappointing for me.
Yeah, in the first game that he came back from his concussion, he played pretty well. So, it's just like you said about the consistency. That's what we're gonna have to see, from him going forward. Because ultimately, after Jokic, it's Jamal Murray that's the second most,
Yes.
that's the second biggest factor for the Nuggets. Because if he
Yes.
can play at that high of a level like we saw the title year, then they'll have a shot.
Yes.
But if not, then they probably don't have much of a shot because there's not really anyone else on the roster that you really expect to be able to put up that type of offensive production, right? It's more so other guys that kind of, need to be set up in certain ways where they're just not normally going to have that type of creation ability, right? They're more so like finishing off the plays that Jokic creates for them. So, again, like you said, I think the main concern was earlier in the season, it looked like that their ability to win regular season games looked like it might have been a little bit rough. But
Right, right,
now
right.
they've been able to, yeah, and now they've been able to figure some things out. But like you said, for them, it's more about the postseason than the regular season. So we assume that they're still going to win a decent amount of regular season games. But do they have enough, like you said, to be able to win the title? And that's where we just need to continue to see more of these young guys playing. But them getting the opportunities now, right, is good for them, regardless. Like Peyton Watson being able to start and getting all these minutes will help. Obviously, it's not good that Aaron Gordon is hurt, right? But,
Hmm.
it's at the very least nice to see that, some of these guys that we had questions about so far have looked good. But it is, like you said, the regular season.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks volumes to how good Jokic is, really, because he's making these
Right.
guys look a lot better. With them being in the starting lineup, I kind of expect them to play better in the starting lineup because you have such a great facilitator and floor general in Jokic. He makes everybody pretty much look 10 times better. Whether it be what your role in the offense is, being a backdoor guy or being a spot up guy, and I think this kind of even goes. Can be said, like, you look at KCP, his numbers in Orlando haven't been too amazing because he's not playing, with a Nikola Jokic. Now you're playing, with Paolo and Franz, who are two very different players, from Nikola Jokic. So I think, KCP is going to have to adjust, to playing with two different guys like that instead of a guy like Jokic, who kind of makes your job easier, if I'm keeping it real.
Yeah. And in the case of Orlando, I mean, Paolo's not even playing at this point. So
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
makes it even worse.
Yep.
So, but yeah, so then, you look across, you continue to look across the Western Conference. I mean, you have some of these other teams that are playing good basketball as of late. You got the Clippers, as we had talked about before, right? The Rockets look like they've righted the ship a little bit. The Wolves had a bad loss to Miami, but other than that, they've been much better recently, right? Golden State, even though they got smashed by Cleveland, they still continue to win. OKC and Phoenix, but we're now kind of moving on into this next topic, which was really just something that had just blown up in the last week or two, where all of a sudden you've just been having a ridiculous amount of injuries across the NBA. And, a lot of these teams are going to have to find ways to be able to, adjust because, a lot of these guys that are getting hurt, many of them are, they're key guys, right? So, I mean, just as of late, right? Like a couple days before, like a day or so ago, right? You had a bevy of injuries that were announced, right? You had, for example, Kevin Durant for the Phoenix Suns, right? Which, I mean, I saw his last game he played, and I didn't even remember a play where he got hurt.
Yeah.
But
Right.
uh, yeah, but against after his game against the Dallas Mavericks, right now he's out for at least 2 weeks with a calf strain. So obviously for the Phoenix Suns, right? That's your best player. He's been playing at an MVP level. The good news for the Suns is they do have more depth than they had last season, right? Like presumably Ryan Dunn, he's going to be in the starting five, right, with KD out. So, you have the defensive pieces, but obviously you never want to lose one of your best players for a long stretch. And this is always the concern with the Phoenix Suns is that, their core guys seem to be guys that generally speaking tend to be more injury prone. And that's the tough part, when that's kind of the core of your team. The good news is, like I said, they do have some depth, but it is a rough injury for the Suns because they've been on a roll recently, and you never want, your improved level of play to be disrupted by a core guy getting hurt.
Yeah, that one hits home very hard for me. I think because seeing him, play at that level at that age, was awesome. So I'm hoping it's not like anything too crazy. But we'll see after the reevaluation. But yeah, that's gonna be a blow that Phoenix is gonna have to kind of take on the chin. I kind of expect them to take somewhat of a step backwards, but it wouldn't surprise me if within like 2 or 3 games they kind of figure it out offensively. Because, like you said, I think defensively you can live with it, but offensively I think is where you might struggle. But the cool thing is you do have this is kind of why you brought in Beal, where I guess
Mhm.
he's kind of supposed to pick up the pieces, and kind of slot in if one of those guys really misses time. That's kind of how I'm looking at that from that perspective. But it really does suck with the whole KD thing because, like you said, they were
Yeah.
off to a super hot start. And I think, people thought a lot of people thought they were going to win the title, but I didn't kind of expect them to come out firing like, 8-1. Like that was not something that I had, in the script.
Yeah. And to be fair with Tyus Jones, you have some facilitating play,
Sure.
so that way, obviously like Booker and Beal are still going to handle the ball a lot, right? But at the very least, worst case scenario, say second units, you'll still have, some organized play there. So
Sure.
like you said, um, I don't necessarily expect them to completely fall off for sure,
Mm-mm.
but obviously it's just you never want to have one of your best players have an injury like that because a calf injury is a serious injury. I mean, clearly because he's going to be out for at least a couple of weeks. But
Yes, sir.
like you said, that's the benefit of having three stars is when one of them is out, you still have two left. So as long as you still have two of your big three, that's kind of the nice part out there.
Yes.
And then another injury, this one is also really unfortunate, is Zion Williamson for the New Orleans Pelicans. He's going to be out indefinitely with a hamstring injury. And this one is even worse than the Durant Phoenix one because, I mean, it's first off, it's indefinite. So we don't even know how long he's going to be out. But even more so, a decent amount of other players on the team are also hurt, right? Because they were already down before Zion Williamson got hurt. They were already down DeJounte Murray, right? He had, the fractured hand, so he's going to be out. Herb Jones, right? He had gotten hurt, so he's been out for a while. I think McCollum has missed some time. A couple of their other guys have been in and out, like Jordan Hawkins. Trey Murphy had been out. So, I mean, you're talking about the vast majority of their main rotation. And now you're without your best player. So, for New Orleans, unlike Phoenix, they have not gotten off to a great start. And a big part of that is the injuries. I mean, even though I don't think neither you nor I were super high on this team because of the lack of center depth, but they've been even worse, and the injuries have not helped that. In fact, it's actually been, like I said, the biggest reason for why. So now you just kind of wonder with New Orleans, is the season kind of already basically over before it's even begun? I mean, because in the Western Conference, you don't have as many teams with terrible records, right? Like, I mean, almost every team in the West, aside from the bottom four, are, 500 or better, right? So, I mean, that's kind of a major problem. I mean, right now, in 10th place is the Kings, and they're 5-4, right? And of course, that's only 9 games in. But either way, right? We expect 11 of these 11 of these teams, right? It was supposed to be like 12 to be in the mix, right? But now, if you're New Orleans, you're starting to fall behind, and now with so many of these guys out, I don't really know what you do. So I almost kind of wonder: is their season basically just kind of cooked, and it might just be time to tank for Cooper Flag, or I don't know, because it's gotten pretty bad for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much they can do. And it's not really their fault.
Right,
Like you said, the injuries are just way too much, and they've happened every single week. Literally every week that the NBA has been back, somebody on that team has been hurt. And that's
right,
just a no-go. And with a team like that, where a lot of your pieces are super essential to your success, a lot of those guys cannot miss time. And that probably is, like you said, a season ender, to be honest, because I expect the Kings to kind of rally and look a little bit better as the season goes on. I kind of expect the Spurs to as well. I think the Pelicans can probably finish above Portland because that's a whole dumpster fire. I think they'll finish above Utah. But, maybe the Clippers fall off a little bit, although they do have some players that have been playing, kind of wild. But,
yeah.
and if depending on how long, all these guys for New Orleans are going to actually be hurt, that's kind of the key because a lot of people when they see these injuries when it's like 4 to 6 weeks, yeah, that's just the reevaluation period, buddy. Like, we might have an even longer stretch where these guys are out, and Zion, your best player, being out indefinitely is probably the one that kind of puts the seal on the deal. So I think their season is most likely over due to the fact that these injuries are piling up, and I expect a lot of the teams in the Western Conference not necessarily to slow down, but to potentially ramp it up and kick it into another gear.
Then another guy, John Morant, right? He got hurt against the Lakers, right, where he took a hard fall after an alley-oop attempt, and he's got basically an injured hip, so he's going to be out. They say week to week, so out at least 1 week. So that's not great, right? Because obviously, like you said, it could be longer than that. It could be a week, but we don't really know. And also, Memphis has also been down other guys as well. Like Desmond Bane's been out for a little bit. Marcus Smart's been out for a little bit. They were already down a couple of young guys like Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson. So a lot of guys out for Memphis again, right? Basically back-to-back seasons so far where they've had pretty tough injury luck. To be fair, they have been able to win, for the most part, right? So their record still is pretty good. And some of these teams, they'll probably be okay with some of these guys out just because they actually do have a decent amount of depth, right? Like a guy like a Jalen Wells probably wouldn't have played a whole lot if the roster was fully healthy, but he's come in and he's actually been really good. You look at some of their other guys, Scottie Pippen Jr. I mean, even Jay Huff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Former Laker from their
Mm-hmm.
G League team, right?
And
He's
Wizard.
come in, yeah, and Wizard, right? So he's come in, and some of these other guys as well, right? Like they just seemingly for whatever reason just have guys everywhere. So they've been able to kind of weather the storm. It's just again, it's always rough to be without some of your best players, right? Because again, Ja is the guy that you have to, make sure that he's healthy because of the fact that there's no one else on the team at that level, and that's your best player. And we already know his style of play can be style of play that lends itself to getting hurt. So not ideal, but you know, we'll see if they can hold on. I suspect they'll still probably be able to win some of these games because their schedule, again, it's the West, right? So any team in the West is not going to have the easiest schedule to begin with, right? But they've been able to kind of stack up some wins now, so that way, if they lose a few games here and there, it's not quite as devastating as it would be, compared to if they were struggling so far to start the season.
Yeah, I think they're gonna probably drop. Um, not
Hmm.
not like maybe like. Well, depending on how long the guy is going to be out, that's the problem. I don't know how
Right.
long he's going to be out. Realistically, but their schedule is potentially kind of rough. Probably up until the November 20th. I'm looking at it. You're gonna have to play LA, the Lakers. Sorry. Then you're gonna have to play Golden State, who's been pretty hot, and then you're gonna
Yeah.
have to play Denver back to back. Like that. That's where I kind of feel a little rough about it. Um,
Right.
but I mean, they could survive. I think as long as he's not out for more than a month, I think they'll be okay. But
Right.
who knows?
Yeah. Then moving on, you did have Chet Holmgren against Golden State playing for OKC. He went down. He had to be helped off the court with a hip injury. We don't know how long he's going to be out, so it could be short term, it could be long term. But it does suck for them because they had already been without Hartenstein. They had already been without their center Jalen Williams.
Mm.
So they've essentially not have any real center depth the entirety of the season, and they've still been able to win. Obviously, they lost to Golden State, which you kind of expected once Chet went down. But it is rough because he had been actually playing really well so far to start the season. And so hopefully, like any of these guys, right? Hopefully he doesn't have to miss time because they do need him, I think, by and large, if they want to continue to win some of these games, just because of the fact that he's one of their best players and he's a guy with size, obviously, that can defend while still being able to help you out majorly on the offensive end. So, again, he's one of your best players, so you never want to lose one of those guys.
Yeah, this is gonna hurt them a lot. I think. Considering like you said how great he has been and how awesome and efficient he's looked. But like you said, Jalen Williams is out as well, the other center, and then Hartenstein out as well. So you know your big man room is not looking too hot. But hopefully the Chet injury isn't too serious, and they can get him back into the swing of things as quickly as possible. But center wise, they're kind of looking scary. So I'm kind of expecting, um, the offense to look a little bit different. And, Shea and J Dub are probably going to have to, cook up a little bit more. But, we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because you just ideally you need at least some level of size out there. I mean, they've been able to win despite being pretty small,
Sure.
but so far this season, but you still need a little bit more. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
see where they go from here. And then obviously, for Philadelphia, right, Tyrese Maxey had just gotten hurt against the Los Angeles Clippers, so he's
Yep.
going to be out for at least a couple of weeks. So that's rough, right? Because they had already been without Joel Embiid. He hasn't played at all. He's supposed to be back this Tuesday, right? And then Paul George had just recently come back. They did get a win in overtime against the Charlotte Hornets, so that helps boost their record a little bit, right? But for the Sixers, it's definitely sucked so far that we're basically almost a month. It probably won't be until at least a month into the season before we get to see the big three play together for one game.
Yeah.
And their record so far is not, hasn't been good. And again, to be fair, none of their main guys have played consistently, so you kind of expect that. But obviously, it's not how you would like to get off to start the season, and that's kind of one of the issues that we've had in terms of being very cautious with the Sixers, is because of the injury history of some of these guys. And Maxey was supposed to kind of be the one that's supposed to be like the bridge guy, right, that can kind of raise their ceiling. But obviously now he's going to be out for at least a little while.
Yeah, and it's like going back to the offseason, the Paul George move, you can't hate on it at all because, you got the best guy of the free agency class on your roster, but you kind of do have to look at the drawbacks of that because to start the season, he wasn't available alongside a guy who already has a horrible injury history and, no real sense of consistency in being able to play a ton of games in the regular season. And then the Maxi thing, hitting them out of nowhere is just rough. Like I genuinely feel bad for how banged up this team is because, sometimes a lot of teams they'll get banged up, with their role players and other kind of like Swiss Army knives and stuff like that. But these are your three stars. Your entire big three was basically banged up and definitely not 100%. So yeah, I'm hoping that Philly can kind of get healthy because I am curious what they do look like fully healthy. But like you said, when are we going to see that? Like that, it's reminding me of Phoenix, last year, where it's like we did not see a good sample size of Beal, KD, and Book, and then by the time they got to the playoffs, they got freaking swept.
Yeah. So, and again, like ideally, if you want to make a run, you want to, especially if you want to win the title, you got to be a top three seed. Like
Yes.
we've not seen a top three seed win the title. We've seen lower seeds make a run, but not win a title. And again, to be fair, because they are in the East and no one in the East really has a crazy record aside from Boston and Cleveland, like you can scratch your way back. It's just having to scratch your way back is already not a good thing to do if you want to win the title. Because,
Yeah.
by and large, if you're going to be a championship team, you can kind of easily just, you tend to kind of breeze through the regular season because you're just, you're talented enough. Obviously, if you're a new team like this team is, you do have to kind of work things out and get the kinks together. And that's something that they're going to have to do, right? Compared to some of these other teams that, are kind of going through the growing pains right now. Whereas for Philly, it will have been, again, over a month into the season before these guys will have played a single game together. But that's kind of the calculus that Philly clearly made going into the season. I'm sure they'll still continue to be, like any of these other teams, active at the deadline, see if they can, acquire some additional pieces if they can. But, it's just, again, that's kind of why it was just kind of tough for me to really bet on Philly, just because of the fact that you always have to be cautious when it comes to them in terms of the health, right? And so far that's what we're seeing through the season. But there's not really anything you can really say about this team until we see these guys play together, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise it just feels kind of a little disingenuous because we've not seen these guys play together, so we don't know what the team looks like fully, fully healthy.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are other key guys around the league, more so not stars, but other players like Malik Monk just got hurt against the Phoenix Suns. Jeremy Sohan, right? It has been out for a little bit with a thumb injury, I think. So he's going to be out for, I want to say, at least a month, right? So obviously, just as they're getting Devin Vassell back, right? They lose Jeremy Sohan, so we'll see how they adjust to that. But in terms of all these injuries around the league, I mean, what the heck is going on? Just because of the fact that, I mean, a lot of guys are dropping like flies, and I mean, I doubt this is the end of it, right? It wouldn't surprise me, unfortunately, if more guys across the season end up, unfortunately, kind of going down. Just because we know over the course of the regular season, some of these guys have heavy workloads, and say for like a Durant, he also played in the Olympics, so there wasn't really a cool down period for him like there usually would be in the off season. But just in general, it's been kind of rough, to see the injury situation around the league because so many of these teams, it's so hard to evaluate because they haven't been together yet.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the injuries. People are always theorizing, did these guys take care of their bodies? Is it, conditioning? Is it stuff like that? I just think it's bad luck. And some of it is age as well. Like I'm not expecting KD to play a crap ton of games, or like, every single game, with his age being like that. AD, kind of he always has had some injury issues. And Embiid, like there's some that don't surprise me. Kawhi, Zion, it's kind of the same thing every year. But the ones that kind of surprise me, like Maxi, that's rough. Like I don't know what's going on though. I think it's really just bad luck. Like I said, I don't think you can really attribute it or pinpoint it to one specific thing. Because feel
Right.
like every injury is going to be different, and every reason for every injury is also going to be different.
Yeah, exactly. It's never one thing that's the cause for, some of these things that are on a larger scale, right?
Yeah,
Like it's
right.
one thing if you're talking about like say somebody failed a test, right, or didn't do their homework, right? You can kind of a lot of times, give one reason easily as
Sure,
to why that happened. But
sure.
in the case of this, right, again, larger scale, a bunch of different guys. Like you said, there's a lot of just different situations. Every person's situation is different. Every person's body is different. So it's just rough because there are some seasons where it definitely feels like the injury sliders have been turned up to 100.
Yeah,
And, again, that's the rough calculus for so many of these NBA teams is just the fact that in order to win, you have to be healthy for the vast majority of the season. And sometimes it does not work out for some of these teams, right? Because, like you said, for Phoenix last year, they were banged up. Where, I mean, Booker and Durant technically were healthy for most of the season, but the big three just didn't really get to play a whole lot together. Beal missed a lot of time. And like you said, in seasons past, right? Like, for the Clippers, right? Every year was one of either Kawhi or Paul George that wasn't available by the end of the year. So just, that's kind of the rough thing when things don't necessarily go your way. So, we'll see. But it's something to keep an eye on because a lot of times in the NBA, right? Healthiest team usually ends up winning. And I mean, for the Celtics, yeah, Porzingis wasn't healthy, but regardless, as we had talked about, the other teams weren't necessarily healthy either.
mm-hmm.
So a lot of times that's kind of how it goes in the NBA. So it's always unfortunate to see these injuries at the start of the season. It's why there are a lot of people that tend to advocate for having a shorter regular season
Please.
in the first place, because in the modern NBA, it's a lot. It's very difficult to be able to stay healthy for 82 games, and then so that because you're basically talking about what, October all the way into April. Then if you're trying to make a playoff run, championship run, that's an extra basically 2 months or a month and a half. So, it's a lot of pressure put onto these guys' bodies. So,
Yeah, and I feel like it's kind of been across all sports. Like even like people who have been paying attention to football, like tons of people are freaking banged up. Granted, it's the
mhm.
halfway point, a little bit beyond that for football, but with basketball, for it to be hitting this early, I think is really the big question. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, just kind of for the final topic, I guess, kind of just a little just status check on a lot of the rookies, around the league, right? Because obviously we know for the
Oh
rookies,
boy.
this rookie class, has generally been regarded as not being amongst the best. But, to be fair, there have been some rookies that so far, I think at least look the part in terms of being like solid, productive players. Like, say, like a Zachary Reese-Share, even though his shooting splits are pretty horrible, right? I think defensively he's been pretty good. He had that, really good game against the Knicks, right, where he had 33 or so. So you can definitely see the foundation of like a really solid 3-and-D wing there, with athleticism and length. So I think efficiency wise, it's looked pretty bad. But I think just in terms of like how does he actually look as a player, I think he's so far been pretty worthy of being one of the top picks, right? I mean, he was the number one pick, and he's been one of the best rookies so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been, solid you know, for what he brings to the table. Like for me, if I were to kind of like rank like the top rookies, he would probably be like number 5 for me, honestly. Because I feel like there have been a few others that I
Yeah.
do like in terms of their contributions, but I think it really comes down to his efficiency. That's the thing that is, kind of bogging him down a little bit for me. Because if he was a little bit more efficient, then yeah, I'd feel pretty amazing. But for his role, and what people kind of expected, I think it's kind of right on par.
Yeah. And then, I guess if you want, you can mention another rookie that you think so far has been, one of the top rookies as well.
Um, it's interesting because I kind of don't want to be biased and choose like my Wizards guys because I feel like you could make a case for all three of them to kind of
Mhm.
be labeled as solid rookies, but I feel like Zach Edey is kind of cheesy, man. He's been averaging
Mhm.
11 and 6.
Yeah.
Nowhere near his numbers at I think it was what, Purdue or something like that. I think he went to Purdue.
Yeah.
But nowhere near his numbers there, but still solid, and what he's been able to do, 25 points, 12 rebounds, 4 blocks in 29 minutes, pretty cool. Hit some walk
I
up
agree.
threes, that's pretty cool as well. Bub Carrington, I think that's another guy that you kind of have to shout out. Um, Pretty cool. Double double stuff like that. 10 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists per game. For the 14th pick, I think that's pretty solid. The thing that is concerning me is there is no clear cut star in this rookie class at all thus far. It's
Mhm.
giving me the vibes of Malcolm Brogdon Rookie of the Year kind of deal, where we're probably not going to see a super crazy amount of points, being scored and things of that nature. But because I think what Brogdon won it with while scoring like 10 points or something. So, we
Right.
might see a guy win it by scoring 11. I don't think it'll be like single digits. That would be very underwhelming, I think.
Yeah.
But
And mhm.
Ryan
Yeah,
Dunn,
for sure.
Sar, I've really liked a lot of the guys because they've slotted in kind of exactly how we thought, and a lot of them are pretty much really good role players and solid building blocks for the team. No franchise guys though, so far.
Right. Yeah, and actually, Memphis' 2 rookies, Jalen Wells as well has
Yes,
actually kind of been, a pretty solid contributor for the Grizzlies, right? Because just we know it's a team that needs perimeter shooting, and he's been able to supply that, right? 38% from 3 on just under 5 attempts a game.
yes,
And, he's been able to rebound, he's been able to, just kind of be a guy that can play within the offense. So, just kind of a pleasant surprise. Again, how much playing time would he have gotten if they were healthy? Maybe not quite as much, but
mm,
it's nice to know that so far he looks pretty comfortable, and I mean, he's been starting for them
yeah,
since they've had a number of guys out. So it's good to see, like you said, another guy that's been able to slot in and play a role. And for Memphis, the fact that you got 2 of those guys and they've been helping them get wins, right, is big time. Because like you said, for Zach Edey, not crazy numbers, but he's only playing 19 minutes a game. So in 19 minutes a game, he's giving you 11 and 7. I mean, that's pretty good. So,
yeah,
and then like you said, when you have Jalen Wells with the jump shooting, that's also been helpful as too. And like you said, the Wizards rookies so far, right? The trio, right? They've had their moments, I think, at different points, where each one of them have had really good moments, and then obviously other moments where they're rookies. So I think, like you said, none of these guys look like franchise guys as of right now, but we weren't really expecting that going into the season. For
hmm
all of these guys, we were expecting, you know, some type of role that they can slot in. I mean, even some of these other guys, like a Stephon Castle, right? Just as like an athletic, like two-way guard. The three-point shot obviously still needs some work, right? That hasn't been falling recently, but you can see the potential there, right? Jared McCain for Philly, who's been forced into playing because there's been so many injuries, right? He's had, pretty solid moments as well, right? Tristan Da Silva's been forced into starting again because of the injuries. So Ryan Dunn, we've already mentioned many times on the show so far. So yeah, even like a Jonathan Mogbo, right, for the
yeah.
Toronto Raptors. Just a lot of solid players all around. I mean, AJ Mitchell for OKC. So just kind of interesting. But are there any players so far where they've been a little underwhelming? Because many of these players that we've mentioned weren't necessarily like the top 5 picks, right? There have been some other guys that have been left out of, the top 10 picks in the draft that we haven't mentioned as of yet.
Um,
And some of them, to be fair, the playing time hasn't been there, but
yeah. I don't even know where to begin because I think you could make a case that there's a lot of them. I'm gonna start with Mataz. I thought he was gonna be a little bit better. Granted, only 8 minutes per game, but in those eight
Mhm.
minutes, he's shooting 29% from the field and 27% from three. Not a great sample size, but I kind of expected a little bit better than that.
Mm.
Another guy who's kind of been underwhelming for me, Ron Holland. From the field, pretty good, but the 3-point shot, way worse than I thought. 15% from the 3-point line, 15 minutes a game, pretty much. So, but I'm not like gonna like stomp these guys while they're down because they still have a long, glorious career ahead of them. But so far, I think they've just kind of like been the slow starters for me.
Yeah. And then like a Dalton Connect just has not been able to hit shots, right? Like he's
Yeah.
getting good looks, but the shots just so far aren't falling. And it's not really like a panic time because I'm gonna assume that those shots will eventually fall.
Hmm.
But either way, yeah, like it's just kind of like you said. You'd like to see a little bit more from some of these guys, right? And then, I mean, Cody Williams for Utah. How are we feeling about him? 'Cause, I mean,
Not good.
I feel like I was gonna say, I feel like he's definitely been not that great as of
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah, not good at all.
considering Utah's situation where they've had some injuries. So he's, presumably had more opportunities to get some, playing time. And I guess he is. He's playing 23 minutes a game, but in the games he's played, he's not been able to really do much. I mean, Utah as a whole has been a mess anyways. I mean, they're so far one of the worst teams in the NBA, which I guess for them is a good thing. But I don't know. It's been really weird just because I thought he'd be better, but it is early to be fair.
Same. I thought he had. I think out of all of the rookie guys, I felt like he was probably the most likely to kind of be the star.
Mhm.
In this rookie race or whatever. But yeah, like you said, he's been pretty bad. And considering the fact that he's probably one of the guys that has gotten the most opportunities outside of like the Wizards trio and like Zachary Reese-Share, I think that's where the red alarms are kind of blaring for me for him because we and like you said, his situation is not great, but still for him to be playing 23 minutes per game and putting up those numbers is quite concerning for me.
Yeah, and then, I guess another player, Kalal Ware. What do we think of him? I mean, to be fair, he's been playing like what 6 minutes a game or something like that, so he's not even really in the rotation. So it may just not be fair, to really discuss him just because. Shoot, injuries wise, as just I almost kind of forgot. Jimmy Butler obviously got hurt, so he's been out for the last couple of games. Although they were able to win against Minnesota, but Kalel Ware just not a whole lot of playing time, and I thought we were kind of expecting him to play a little bit more, just because what are the centers outside of Bam that he's competing, for minutes with?
Yeah, right. And I think it kind of goes back to the thing I was talking about with Mataz, where it's like not a lot of minutes, but even in the minutes, not too hot. And granted, not a lot of opportunities for the guy, but like you said, you would kind of expect him to be playing a lot more, considering the way the roster is constructed. And I think people had the expectation that at some point we would kind of see him and Bam potentially be a good front court duo, but that does not seem like it's coming to fruition at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and then guys in similar situations, right? Like Dillingham hasn't really been getting minutes at all, so
Yeah.
it's kind of not really fair necessarily to really evaluate. I don't really
Yeah.
think.
Yep.
Um, Reed Shepard hasn't really been playing a whole lot, and I think that was a guy that most people kind of had pegged as a possible rookie of the year. But the minutes just haven't really been there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know if that's just because he's just been kind of underwhelming, or if it's just they do have a lot of other guards that are playing, so there's probably just again not a whole lot of opportunity there.
Yeah.
But and then like an Isaiah Collier for Utah seems like he just can't shoot. But again, like the whole Utah group has just been kind of messy. So I kind of at least want to wait to see a little bit of what Utah looks like potentially, like maybe if they make a trade and kind of get rid of some of these veterans down the line, maybe it'll look different. And then last but not least, like a Donovan Clingan, right? In the minutes he's played, and then again, like his opportunities have been kind of mixed anyways, because Robert Williams just came back. I mean, he's rebounding the ball. He's not even getting a lot of shot opportunities anyways. So it's like, what, like 4 points, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks a game, which is pretty good. I mean, Portland just stinks anyways. So it's like you're kind of getting what you would like to see in some aspects with the rebounding and the defense. It's just, again, I'm just kind of curious how they, distribute the minutes, because again, you have three centers that kind of need playing time. I mean, especially because again, Robert Williams just came back for the Portland Trail Blazers.
Yeah, I mean, Klingen's an interesting guy in terms of how he's been playing recently. I haven't been, blown out of the water completely, and like you said, very limited minutes. But I feel like he's been a little more clumsier than I thought he
Hmm.
actually was going to be, because at UConn, I thought he was a little bit more polished, but here it seems like it might have taken a step back. And granted, you're playing against different levels of competition here, but kind of yeah, I don't know, kind of goofy in my opinion in terms of the way that he tries to finish lobs, the pick and roll stuff. It just doesn't look like it, and he looks like a legit rookie, which isn't a bad thing at all. And his numbers aren't horrible by any means. I think they're pretty solid considering the minutes and the roles and the type and the role and the type of player that he is. But yeah, definitely not super high on my list. Like Stephon Castle too, kind of same thing as Cody Williams, where it's like very underwhelming in some aspects, but his defense has been good.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, for some of these guys, we knew that there were going to be certain elements of their game that were going to be ahead of the game than others, right? Because we knew
Yeah.
defensively and rebounding wise, he'd be there. But like you said, the mobility hasn't quite translated just yet into the NBA. And again, some of that will probably, improve with time, in minutes and whatnot, just because, again, Portland's situation has been, a little bit strange, I think, for a lot of these young players, right? So, because again, they have a mix of some guys that are veterans and then, other guys that are younger that probably would, ideally could get minutes, for a team that's not very good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, but again, obviously things will change as the season goes on. Some of these guys maybe hopefully will pick it up. Some of these guys that are starting hot may come back down to earth. We don't know, but just as you said, overall, I think for this rookie class, it's kind of what we expected, maybe a little bit worse, but I think at the same time, like we didn't expect star power, like you said, from any of these guys, at least in year one, because it just was not considered that type of class. So we'll see what happens as we go on. But, again, it's been a slow start for some of these guys, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. A lot of slow starters. I feel like these guys
Yeah.
are probably going to be late bloomers.
Hmm. And then, now to close out the episode, not like a ton of rumors. I guess, we do have a few that kind of have come in from guys like Mark Stein and Jake Fisher. Mark Stein, for example, mentioned Bucks trade up to Giannis. Antetokounmpo will only be available if he pushes for it. And we kind of talked about that earlier anyways, where for the Bucks, we're just going to have to see where this team is headed by the time the deadline rolls around as we get closer. Because if a month and a half goes by, like say we're towards the end of December, and the team is still not really looking that great, doesn't really look like there's much of a pathway, even with a trade, then maybe we might get there. But again, as we always know with the Stars, it's up to the Stars. They're not going to trade Giannis unless he requests it. And for now, he's clearly frustrated, but he may not be quite at the point yet where he's ready to ask out. Because I think they at the very least maybe want to see if they can get some guys in there rotationally that can help. But a lot of the type of players that they want, I mean, that's the type of players that everybody wants. So, and do they have the assets to kind of be able to jump ahead of maybe some of these other teams? Maybe, but probably not.
No.
I mean, it's kind of more so just expiring contracts, more so than pieces that other teams would actually want.
Yeah. And the only freaking teams that are probably going to take on expiring contracts are teams that are bad. Like I feel like if they went out and got like, a Dorian Finney-Smith, that could probably help, but at the same time I feel like there's other teams that could put together a much better package long term and stuff like that. But it wouldn't, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if by the deadline, we just get a freaking Shams bomb and Giannis is traded somewhere, that has the ability to create a package.
Yeah, and then funny you mentioned Dorian Finney-Smith. Also, according to Mark Stein, teams eyeing the Nets trio. Brooklyn expected to make Dennis Schroeder, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Bojan Bogdanovic available for trades. Now, Bogdanovic hasn't played yet because obviously he had that surgery last season, right, when he was with the Knicks. But Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith so far have been playing very well for the Brooklyn Nets. And again, I don't know if the play is sustainable, but they're certainly playing at a high enough level that I'm sure some of these contending teams would like to possibly acquire them. Again, for Shooter, a backup point guard, that can give you some, two-way punch at times, and obviously just, a guy that's been in some big games. And then Dorian Finney-Smith is just kind of another 3-and-D wing that you could just kind of put out there. And then Bogdanovic, another microwave guy, presumably off the bench. So I guess, if you're one of these teams, which guy are you kind of the most intrigued by in terms of acquiring?
Probably Dorian Finney-Smith. Like you said,
Mhm.
he kind of fits that mold of what everybody's looking for. A wing that can hit threes and play defense, 3-and-D. So that would be kind of cool. I think Bogdanovic would also be interesting as well because we know what he can do.
Mhm.
With the ball in his hands. The mid-range 3-point, 3-level scorer pretty much. And then Schroeder, I feel like that's the one that people are probably gonna be the most scared of because we kind of know what he looks like in different roles, but
Mhm.
still not a bad player by any means. And it's smart of Brooklyn to make these guys available and sell as high as you possibly can and get the most value out of them. And they'll probably go to pretty solid teams. Like I don't see any bad
Yeah.
teams, making a jump for these guys. Like these are going to be guys
No.
that will fall to team or not fall, but land on teams that are probably lacking some serious depth.
Yeah. I guess the question then also could be like which of those three is the most likely to be moved, and then, which one may teams be the most hesitant on? I mean, I don't know. I mean, my thought process would be Dorian Finney-Smith. I would think might be the one that might just be likely to be moved, just because he, like you said, has the reputation as a 3-and-D wing.
Hmm.
Right, Bogdanovich, he is a little bit older and more of an offensive oriented wing.
Hmm.
And then obviously Schroeder as a backup point guard, he could probably get moved. I mean, none of their contracts are ridiculous. I mean, they're all contracts that I think by and large, any team could kind of talk themselves into picking up. I mean, like Schroeder's making 13 million, Finney Smith's making just under 15, and then Bogdanovich is at 19. So that's the one that might be a little bit tougher. I mean, just because it's $20 million or close to $20 million, whereas Shooter and Dorian Finney Smith are 13 and 15. So that's why I think those two guys might be more likely to be moved than Bogdanovich. But would it be a shocker if all three guys were moved? Probably not. And that's the thing for the Brooklyn Nets is they've been playing better than expected. But if you're the Nets, you don't really want to be good this season. So ideally, you kind of want to move some of these guys, like you said, while they're playing well and capitalize on them. Maybe you get picks or something like that. And then, you kind of just go from there. Because, if you're the Nets, I mean, I don't see a version, even if these guys continue to play as well, where they make the playoffs anyways. But there could be a version where, like, maybe they're, I don't know, they have like the seventh worst record instead of like the third or fourth worst record. So they probably want to get into that bottom five so that way they can get, one of those top five guys. So moving those guys certainly would go a long way towards helping that. It's just again, all of them, like you said, can be a factor for these teams if they're in the right role, right? Because we know for all of these guys, the more you're asking out of them, the worse they're gonna look, right? Like if you're gonna ask Dennis Schroeder to, carry your offense, he's probably gonna start looking a lot worse just because,
Yes.
come playoff time, that's just not, a realistic expectation. He can be a spark plug, he can be an energy backup point guard off the bench. We've seen him do it. We saw him do it with LA, we saw him do it with OKC. But for any of these guys, they're not perfect players, but these are the type of players that if you're a team, you might want to target. Like if you're Milwaukee, a Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that you would like to target just because of the fact that you don't have a 3-and-D wing on your roster really at all. So, the more of those type of guys, the better for a lot of these teams because everybody's looking for these type of players.
Yeah.
Whether or not it be a microwave guy off the bench or a 3-and-D guy.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it kind of it's just smart to make these guys available because at the end of the day, you're probably the Brooklyn Nets are looking for their franchise guy, and the only way you're going to get that person is either by trading up in the draft or being bad enough to get the number one pick, and I think they're probably looking to just be bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
Just kind of before we close out, yeah, we did actually get some games that look like that they're wrapping up. Like the Denver Nuggets ended up getting the crunch time win against the Dallas Mavericks, so that pushes them to 7-3, right?
Mhm.
Where the Mavericks kind of fall basically to 5-5. They've had some injuries to some of their role guys. And then for the Sacramento Kings and the Phoenix Suns, it looks like the Sacramento Kings will pull out the win in overtime, right? Obviously no Kevin Durant. I think Nurkic got hurt in this game as well. So, obviously for them, we'll keep an eye on those teams. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about, what's going on around the league so far with some of these teams getting off to slow starts, some of these teams getting out to hot starts. Obviously the injuries around the league because those are pretty serious as well. And then, possibly some trades, right? Because this is the point of the season where, people are already kind of starting to get sick of some guys and trying to see what guys can we move and which guys we can bring in, right? As as we are fans of teams where we've been talking about these things all the time, right? This is a yearly thing for our teams. So, I mean, again, just let us know. And again, keep in mind, if you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, obviously, to help us grow out our channel. And we'll see you in the next episode.